Say NVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan 52 Operational Agreements OAS. Details. An operational agreement is a default strategy or a high-threshold recommendation for a particular way of doing things. Operational agreements are similar to policies in that they serve as a typical template for how to do things. They are different from policies in that they are not rules, and each partner or weave is welcome to adapt them to local circumstances and provide feedback as below. NVC 0 includes OAS because they are an essential ingredient of self-management and are considered by those issuing them as the most in alignment with our vision, purpose, and mission, with our organizational culture, and/or with other principles that guide our work and organizational functioning. They serve to support us in living into the new paradigm of collaboration even while we start within the existing world. At present, the two elements of the current paradigm NVC OAS are designed to transcend our internalized powerlessness that interferes with true collaboration, and patterns of power and privilege that interfere with access and mattering. In that way they serve to support movement towards our vision. Each partner agrees, in principle, to accept operational agreements OAS in most cases except when consciously choosing other strategies to attend to specific needs or circumstances that were not considered in the creation of the OAS in question. In such cases, they agree to provide feedback to the Global Council or any other relevant weave or other body for future editions of the OAS in question. OAS are high-threshold recommendations in that choosing to do things differently from an OAS would not be done lightly. Only after careful consideration of the needs that led to their establishment as well as the needs and circumstances that make it a challenge to follow the OAS and can thus support new learning for future editions of the OAS. The word policy connotes rule-like behavior to such a high degree that VSGWG sensed that something else is needed as a reminder of the unique nature of a high-threshold recommendation. Like a policy, an OAS is designed to be applied across the board, in most if not all situations. Unlike a policy, it is not a rule. People are invited to consider its application in the context of needs and circumstances that were not necessarily thought about when the OAS was designed. 1. Diagram 53. The following diagram illustrates the particular location of operational agreements on the spectrum of needs and strategies. Needs, values & principles. Strategies. Menu of possible strategies. Recommended strategy with openness to alternate strategies. Default strategy with changes made only after serious consideration. & built-in feedback mechanisms. Fixed strategy. Operational agreement. Operational agreements. In relation to strategy continuum. Varieties of operational agreements. 1. A Global Operational Agreement GOA, a OAS that has been ratified by the Global Council and is recommended as a way of functioning throughout NVCO. Note, whenever the term operational agreement or OAS is used without any qualifier, global is assumed. 2. A Domain Operational Agreement DOA, a way of doing things that has specific value in a particular geographic, project, or other theme context and that is seen as valuable in that context by the relevant weaves, such as a cluster if it would apply within that domain. Creating OAS. One of the Global Council's ongoing functions is to initiate global operational agreements. In addition, any partner can initiate and/or develop a potential operational agreement. The partner then shares their idea, including background information such as the needs the potential OAS is expected to attend to, with other partners in the organization and collects feedback from them. They too also test drive it within organizational weaves they are part of for fine-tuning and learning. When this entire process is complete, they share the potential operational agreement and the feedback they have collected either with the Global Council, or if it is a DOA with any other weaves within the relevant domain. The Global Council or relevant domain weaves consider together whether the potential OAS is in alignment with NVC 0 on the whole or with the domain, and when the relevant body agrees that it is in such alignment, the potential operational agreement is shared and NVC 0 as a ratified global or domain operational agreement as the case may be. OAS and self-management. During the meetings of the Integration Council, and through extensive conversations, the following clarity emerged in the group. 1. OAS are what provides coherence across an organization, which then allows self-management to take place without any supervision from a center that makes decisions for the whole. 2. Some OAS are like an organizational fingerprint, in that they clearly identify how the organization operates and thus specify its unique identity. 3. Some OAS are more in place as a way to recognize the gap between the world as it is and the world as we envision it. Most significantly, when something is a product of historical power imbalances and privilege, it may not serve access and equity to simply grant full self-management and autonomy to those who may experience a vested interest in continuing the status quo. It may be necessary to institute structural elements to counterbalance the historical inertia of privilege in order to create access and serve equity. Accordingly, it appears that if the world begins to move in the direction of truly attending to everyone's needs, some OAs may die out naturally. Initial set of OAs in thinking about how much work to do to create operational agreements, SGWG chose to be minimalist, and to develop a skeleton for only those OAs that, 1. are necessary for defining the organizational structure we created. 2. organically occurred to us in the process of developing this structure. 3. are important in order to establish an initial culture that attends to the effects of privilege and colonialism. 4. or were developed in response to some feedback from others. In aiming to provide both sufficient upfront clarity and sufficient openness to emergence and unfolding, the plan includes only those OAs and systems that we believe to be essential to getting things going. 3. Beyond that, we anticipate, along the lines of feedback from Frederick Laloux, that most OAs 55 necessary for organizational functioning will be developed over time by individual partners and the GC through encountering new challenges or circumstances, through resolving and learning from conflicts, and imagining new possibilities. All of the OAs that we have developed so far are intended to be GOAs and are presented in a separate section of the plan. The Implementation Council will complete the refinement of the initial set of GOAs and/or create new ones sufficient to allow NVC 0 to launch. 456C NVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan. Meta comments about structure. Why we chose what we chose in approaching this work. The Integration Council adopted a new model and built our own platform out of our deep passion for what Gandhi calls experiments in truth, aiming, with full rigor and faith, to live the utmost potential of what we teach. Simply put, we want the organization at the heart of the NVC movement to reflect and be a living laboratory for the full radical potential of the paradigm implicit in NVC. Because NVC per se doesn't offer a complete recipe for how people can organize and work together effectively and collaboratively, we have been walking a rich and complex line of both creating and borrowing. On the one hand, our choices in no way imply that we are against existing organizational structures or existing platforms. Only that we want to create something that stands on its own rather than comparing it to other models. We believe what we are aiming to do here is unique, and want it to be custom-tailored to the needs and conditions that our global network exists in. In particular, we are interested in establishing a virtual home that is not beholden to any corporate entity whose existing platform we might have chosen to utilize. On the other hand, we have done some research into what has been learned from experiments in other groups and organizations. We have not done a thorough review of all that exists. We only relied on what we have already encountered in our work so far, simply by virtue of the limits of our bandwidth. Based on that, we have drawn extensively on the work of Frederick Laloux as described in Hay's book Reinventing Organizations, since the organizations he studied seem both effective and aligned with values implicit in NVC. We have also incorporated sociocratic elections into our design, which is one tool in many that are part of sociocracy, an organizational structure and governance approach which was previously adopted by CNVC for some period before being abandoned. We did not adopt additional elements because we see it as containing much more hierarchy than we wanted. See more below in Thoughts about Sociocratic. In addition, thanks to feedback from John Buck, our key sociocracy consultant in the US, including for me to CNVC, we were excited to read about backbone organizations in the literature on collective impact. See Stanford Social Innovation Review. Their functions are described as guiding vision and strategy, supporting aligned activities, increasing public awareness, advancing policy or mobilizing funding. These mirror what we have in mind for NVCO, including the very notion of backbone, being of service to the NVC 0 community to support its efforts to spread NVC in the world. Most especially, we are choosing to create a structure that aims to embody, in full, the assumption of the interdependence of all things. We are choosing a structure which challenges us to move from talking about interdependence to really living it as fully as possible in each moment, day to day in real time, and in the potential challenges our structure itself may create. We are providing a platform for modeling what we talk about, to help us to stretch beyond competition and scarcity into the full paradigm of collaboration, power, and sufficiency. We want to see and show that it is truly possible to do. Thoughts about decision-making and hierarchy. In the feedback received on earlier versions of this plan, before the Integration Council formed, there was a repeating theme of concern about hierarchy and power over. Although the main item of concern at the time is no longer present, because the plan has changed, there is, still, a global council, consisting mostly of individuals selected from each of 9 weave clusters, which could superficially look like a hierarchy in which some people at the top decide things for others who are removed from authority and have no say. This structural form provides a context to support dialogue and flow of information and resources. It also allows for ease in identifying the need for additions and changes to the operational agreements at different scales. Existing operational agreements concerning decision-making and the role of weaves are designed to limit the opportunities for power over and to maximize the autonomy and influence of people everywhere in the NVCO. The Integration Council sees our current times as a period of deep transition in human affairs, and our work in NVC as a significant piece of supporting that shift. In particular, we see it as essential for us to engage with great questions through what we teach and how we organize ourselves. Some questions this structure invites us to grapple with include: working out the relationship between power and needs, resources and choice, leadership and collaboration. Investigating where freedom exists within the above exploration. Living our way into creating an organization that can make things happen, continue to honor the needs of all within it, and collaborate towards a shared purpose. We all believe that coordination and leadership are different from control and power over, and that structure is not the same as a hierarchy of power. For anyone interested in these topics, we invite you to read Mickey Ashton's series called Myths of Power, and especially the piece about hierarchy. The structure adopted in the integrated plan has no central point of authority where things are decided. For example, we have been asked who sanctions a new weave, and the answer is no one. They are self-selecting. We have adopted principles from Frederick Lalo's work, and most especially the principle of self-management, which means that, in the most elemental way, each partner in NVC0 can make any decision provided they have sought advice first from some others. See details within the structural details document. At the same time, to honor the needs we see for coordination and leadership, we have adopted the strategy of having a global council that includes an internal leader. This strategy is based, in part, on growing experience within organizations that are purpose-driven and self-managing. Such organizations have carefully pared down the functions of leadership to minimize as far as possible the risk of authority-based modes of operation creeping back in, knowing that the risk remains and cannot be controlled. 2. The kind of questions that would come to weave subclusters and beyond to attend to are those that local weaves recognize they cannot decide on their own. A weave subcluster is just a collection of individuals, all of whom are part of and selected by the weaves making up the subcluster, and so on. As such, they have clarity about what can be decided locally and what would benefit from an overview and coordination that the subcluster can provide, along with a sense of what would need to be consulted with the selecting weaves and what would not. The same decision-making process applies all the way to the Global Council. The internal leader has very carefully thought out and deliberate functions that no one else has as their unique function, even though every partner partakes of these functions by virtue of being a partner. Overall, although the name of our group includes governance within it, we have chosen to create a structure within which the question of governance is pretty small, as all entities are self-governing and self-managing, coordinated and not directed by the Global Council. Thoughts about sociocracy when looking at the weave structure, especially an earlier version that had an elaborate concentric structure for what is now the community interface cluster. Some readers, including John Buck, have concluded that what we have designed is, indeed, hierarchical and similar enough to sociocracy that they wondered why we haven't adopted sociocracy or holacracy, a system derived from sociocracy with other principles and practices added to it. Here are the differences as we see them. The first one is structural. In the sociocracy approach, as we understand it, there is double linking between circles, with one going up the hierarchy, selected by the lower circle, and one going down the hierarchy, appointed by the higher circle. This would mean, for example, that any subcluster would appoint someone to each of the weaves that make up the subcluster. In our design, on the other hand, there is only single linking, and it's all bottom-up. There is also a particular kind of accountability built into it because Global Council members are themselves individual partners participating in weaves. The second difference is functional. In the sociocracy approach, as we understand it, except for the kinds of decisions that come to the circles to make, of which there are quite a number of significant, key decisions, day-to-day operations continue to be decided in a top-down manner. There are still bosses and employees, for example, and the bosses still decide things. In our design, all day-to-day operations happen at the local level, be it a community interface weave dealing with the tasks of connecting and serving the community, a project weave figuring out funding and implementation, or a maintenance weave attending to bookkeeping tasks. Subclusters and the Global Council attend to functions of coordination, conflict resolution, and the like when it is clear to weaves and to clusters that a higher level discussion is useful and necessary. Thoughts about management, cohesiveness, and accountability. One principle we are taking from Lalo is the idea of self-management, in which teams that work closely together are fully empowered to get things done in ways that are highly self-responsible. 3. With outside support as needed, but without traditional oversight or command and control. Although some elements in the structure could appear to recreate a traditional hierarchy, they are designed for coordination and cohesion rather than control. Ours is ultimately a radically decentralized, distributed design, with little potential for the sort of unilateral power over that is common in traditional organizations. Another principle we are taking from Lalo is that, in the absence of power over as a core organizing principle, cohesiveness and effectiveness are supported through focus on an evolutionary purpose, through the intentional creation and propagation of a strong organizational culture, and through effective mechanisms for feedback and conflict resolution. We have given particularly careful consideration to these kinds of factors, and believe they will keep the organization from devolving into an incoherent mass of people working at cross purposes and without accountability. Instead, they will support effectiveness, alignment, and synergy. It is for these kinds of reasons that we have chosen to maintain the distinction between the organization and the community that surrounds it. The process of becoming a partner, see details within the onboarding process document, is very deliberate and fairly stringent. We wanted to do all we could to increase the chances that people who join the NVC 0 have deep alignment with its organizational culture and join because of commitment to service. At the same time, we wanted to offer more cohesiveness and form to the larger NVC community of people who are called to participate in and belong to something that inspires them. Thoughts about our operational principles. The intention within this plan is to establish an organizational structure and forms of governance that put into practice the radical potential of the NVC paradigm. We have taken deep care and put in a lot of thought into understanding and translating that paradigm into the practical realm of organizational functioning. This is one area where we anticipate continuing refinement and learning, since, on a global scale, human evolution is in the early phases of creating organizations that function to serve needs rather than profit or control. While in many areas of operation the necessity for collaboration and new forms of governance is already recognized in the world, as evidenced, for example, by the work of Frederick Lalo on which we rely heavily, there is one core area of functioning within the overwhelming majority of organizations in the world which continues to operate based on concepts that promote separation and scarcity, the allocation of resources. This is most present in systems of compensation, as they are generally called. We are not aware of any existing model for allocating resources that is based on needs. The notions of merit or value in allocating resources, where individuals and groups receive resources based on how much they contribute rather than how much they need, remains within the deserve paradigm that NVC is explicitly seeking to transform. Accordingly, and although the generation, management, and flow of resources are the domain of the Resources Working Group, SGWG has adopted some principles relating to resources that, to us, are an integral and essential part of establishing an entirely new way of functioning that is in line with the core paradigm of NVC. Most especially, we are referring to the last three operational principles, see structural details, which anchor for us the commitment to support the focus on service, making it possible, keeping for the energy of willingness, and continuing to commit to learning about and transforming existing forms of allocation that continue to reinforce privilege and separation. Postscript from SGWG, our humble service. We include here the original note written by SGWG at the time of presenting its work product to the Integration Council. We are deeply aware that what we are offering here is very different from what exists now and from what exists in most organizational models. We see a number of obstacles that could get in the way of a successful transition, and want to acknowledge and name them. Along with the reality that there is no guarantee that this approach, along with the outcome of other working groups, will ever take off. Overall, we accept this possible outcome, as we believe in allowing energy to ebb and flow where and if it exists rather than in propping up any part of the organization artificially. Here are some examples of obstacles we foresee, and how we anticipate attending to them. 1. Some groups may continue to operate in ways that some people experience as ineffective. Our approach to this is that there will be no drain on NVCO, since weaves will not be supported to function except when strategic choices about that are made, for example seeding weaves in certain projects or locations, and thus if they are inefficient, lacking competence, etc., they will die, and that is part of what will happen organically. 2. Confusion may continue to exist about the difference between the NVC0 community and NVCO, members and partners, and the different purposes, functions, and ways of operating that each entail. Our approach to this is to release any attempt to control the outcome. While we have a deep conviction that these distinctions are essential to the prospect of having NVCO become a significant player in global efforts to create a livable future, if they don't take hold, then it only means that, collectively, we are not at a place that makes that possible. 3. Internalized versions of authority-based paradigms may exist in enough of us that the care we have put into this might not be enough to prevent a power over structure from resurfacing. We have designed structures of leadership and service that are both empowered and collaborative. We have not done away with selection, representation, or leadership, as we believe strongly that collaborative forms of such practices are vitally necessary, rather than imagining that an organization as large as we are can function in a purely emergent way, without coordination of decisions or flow of resources. We can only hope that enough of us, in enough places and positions of responsibility, will be able to uphold the clarity of vision and focus that we brought to this endeavor. 4. We have a sense that understanding of the difference between learning and teaching NVC on the one hand, and applying NVC in projects on the other hand, is still emerging within the larger NVC community. The same is true about the difference between aiming to reach a critical mass of people and aiming to create new organizational forms and systemic transformation. We believe that in 5 understanding of these differences is, again, vital to the possibility of fulfilling the dream of contributing to a world that works for all life. We remain uncertain about whether or not that understanding might take hold within the global community. Accordingly, we offer what we created in humble service, knowing we cannot control the future, hoping that enough people get excited about what we created and the potential it makes possible, that we can co-create a future for NVC0 that many individuals will want to support. 662C NVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan Creating Access 1. Purpose Mandate from CNVC New Future Process Working Group 11, Creating Access. What, if anything, will we do to make the benefits of what NVC offers available to people, or with fewer economic resources, or in areas without NVC organizations, or with different languages and cultures, or across diverse demographic groups, so to many more people? Why is this Creating Access Working Group necessary? Part of the mission of CNVC is to make this work accessible and widespread, to create a world where everyone matters and can choose if it's in their best interests to want to incorporate NVC into their lives. We view issues around access as inherent in every aspect of the NVC movement and crucial to its growth and sustainability. There are several ways to look at issues of access. At its most simple, access issues arise when there is a divide between the modes in which NVC is shared and the folks who would receive that sharing. This divide is commonly addressed when translators are brought in to bridge the gap between the trainer, often Western, often English, German or French speaking, and the learner, speaking any number of non-Western languages. Other examples of commonly named issues of access include the shortage of trainers for more familiar with local cultures, lack of financial resources held by those who would be trained to bring trainers to their communities, issues related to differences in learning styles, and challenges in conveying information across disabilities. This working group spent some time enumerating some of these issues of access and suggesting strategies to ameliorate them. There are other more subtle issues of access that have not received as much attention. In order to create a consciousness shift around the world based on inclusion and power with, we believe we need to address issues of access, power and privilege in a. the practice of teaching NVC and sharing opportunities to learn NVC, and b. how these issues play out in our global community. In our view, issues of access and equity form the carpet underlying all the one furniture in our home. Without attention paid to these issues in the teaching and practice so circumflex NVC, we believe the contribution that NVC can offer to effect social change will not be fully appreciated. I hesitate to speak of nonviolence anymore. It often feels like BS to me and to many people I work with, especially when it is out of context of the huge social, economical, political and historical injustice that is daily life for so many. Jivantv Siva, www.sandhi.org. Anecdotally, we have heard that NVC, as it's commonly being practiced in the global north and in some clusters in the global south, is often perceived as an activity undertaken by those with privilege. A cynical view may hold NVC as just another self-help modality, or worse, as a way to reinforce power and privilege of the elites. Without a deeper understanding of and a more precise language to talk about how domination hierarchies are constructed and maintained, consciously and unconsciously through our actions as individuals and in institutions, we run the risk of alienating great numbers of folks from NVC communities when their challenges are not fully acknowledged, and we may shortchange the transformative potential of NVC as a means to support social change. NVC principles: to think beyond right-wrong, to hear our voices and advocate for all our collective needs, may be perceived as lip service if the huge economic disparities, themselves the legacy of historical injustice and current systems of privilege and punishment, are not addressed or don't even have a chance of being addressed. This is especially possible if we as practitioners are not trained to inquire about, elicit and hear the needs of others who live in different social, economic, political contexts than our own. This working group has focused on questions such as: how do we bring the critical awareness of structures of power and privilege from anti-oppression work to NVC, deepening the understanding and application of NVC as it frames issues of power and domination? How do we raise awareness of these issues so that NVC practitioners can align their work more effectively with the goal of sharing power? 2. Vision. We dream of a truly inclusive movement committed to addressing unequal access to learning opportunities and resources, despite differences in access to technology, language, culture, social class, gender, education, learning styles, physical and mental ability, and exposure to interpersonal, cultural and intergenerational trauma. We dream of a movement that allows everyone to have access to and choice about how this work can be used. We are deeply committed to both NVC and to the body of work already existing from other nonviolence and social justice movements that have helped illuminate how we engage in power dynamics and the ways our societies are structured to reproduce inequities from one generation to the next. We believe our understanding of NVC is informed by this larger social awareness and one strategy for achieving it. We acknowledge others who have come before us too have already been working for or have even given up their lives to advance this understanding. And we believe that NVC has much to offer in proposing alternative ways we can live together in the world. 3. Terms. This part of the plan includes a number of terms that we are leaving undefined. This is because they are not new, and yet there might not be common understanding or agreement about what they mean. For example, privilege. We chose not to define these as we sense that could lead into a debate about the meaning of the terms that would lead away from the intended focus. Here's a list of those terms: privilege, marginalized, under-resourced. Global north/south, power, social location, transforming oppression. Here we are referring to a body of work usually known as anti-oppression, which has a specific and wide-ranging history and comes from the lived experiences and struggles of many people. We are using, instead, the term transforming oppression as a way to honor the particular approach to this work that's grounded in NVC. Domination hierarchies, critical awareness, internalized behaviors, unconscious habits of organizational behavior that continue to reproduce the domination structure. 4. Principles. 1. Cultivating awareness of power and privilege into the body of knowledge of what we call NVC, into its theory and practice. Everyone's needs matter, and most of us have been raised in domination structures which prioritize, structurally and within us, some people's needs more than others. We believe we will not be able to work together towards a world where everyone's needs matter without the critical awareness of how power dynamics are constructed and reproduced through external structural imbalances of access to resources. And 3. 5. Through internalized behaviors, experiences, and worldviews that reinforce them. Without such an awareness, it may be difficult to see how to apply the principles of NVC to social change, and unlikely for us to live the principles we teach in our own organizations and networks. In our view, the body of knowledge of NVC currently is not complete in the way it engages with issues of power and privilege. References to domination structures and power over relationships do not explicitly outline how the dynamics of power work and how to interrupt it. We acknowledge that work has begun in this area, for example, see the work of the Nonviolent Leadership for Social Justice Retreat and Mickey Ashton et al. Reference material, Power, Resources and Choice, and Framing Privilege and Diversity for NVC Trainers. We trust that with increased awareness amongst more NVC practitioners, it will spur more dialogue and creative approaches on how NVC can be employed to interrupt the maintenance of hierarchies and offer fresh alternatives. We would like dialogue around power, privilege and access to become integral to the body of knowledge and experience that people need to be an NVC trainer. 2. Decentering. We are in alignment with the principles underlying SGWG's vision of a new organizational structure based on the analogy of Indra's web where information, feedback and resources flow throughout the system, not in traditional, hierarchical ways, nor from center to periphery. And we also ask, In a self-organizing system, how do we ensure more resources are distributed from where they exist to those who lack access to them? How do we back, with resources, our intention to support increased participation and engagement in this global movement from all parts of the world and from marginalized communities within each of the regions, including in the more affluent parts of the world? For example, how to bring resources to support translation and the creation of accessible and culturally meaningful teaching materials throughout the world in a self-organizing structure where each community and each region comes together as they wish based on themes or location? The SGWG has proposed defining a set of operational agreements, OAs, to which partners in the organization will agree. These OAs are principles that will define ways in which the organization will operate to be in alignment with its vision and values. We believe that if the OAs include strategies to attend to issues of access, they will provide the mechanism for the organization to encourage attention and commitment to these issues. We encourage extensive dialogue and connection within the currently existing NVC community, associated organizations and trainers around issues of access to raise understanding and awareness of those trainers who may not be familiar with, or even in alignment with, some of the recommendations we propose. We want those trainers currently connected to the community to be included in the framing of the OAs related to access. 3. Continuing education. Our goal is to support the alignment of NVC practice with the Power With ethos by making visible the invisible barriers to access in terms of power and privilege. The community can do this by asking, what are our unconscious habits of organizational behavior that continue to reproduce the domination structure, and how can 466 we change? What gaps in knowledge and information, what unexamined filters and assumptions do we hold when sharing NVC with others, and how does this limit who gets to participate? 4. Commitment to cultivating partnership models and relationships across power divides, in contrast to charity or missionary models. Our goal is to invite shared power, and to work in ways grounded in an acknowledgement of the dignity, value and contributions of everyone. The charity model cannot exist without disparities and is grounded in those who have, giving to those who do not. It is often embedded in an awareness of differences in access to material resources, but also perceptions of value, worth, and ability, where those with more access to resources are more highly valued and more capable or knowledgeable. These sometimes unconscious assumptions lead those who have to pity and wish to help those who don't, those who see themselves as enlightened to save the lost, when the actual differences in material resources between groups is often the historical consequence of systems of oppression. The charity model does not fully acknowledge the dignity, capacity for self-determination and self-care and other resources that already exist in communities with less access to material resources. When resources are shared in the charity model, they are often done so without true partnership and collaborative decision-making on how those resources are used. 5. Concerns re. Institutional support to address inequities. NVC practitioners on the margins working on social change projects may assume great personal risk, especially in countries with political repression, as they hold out a vision of what's possible in the world, a vision that challenges dominant cultural norms. To what extent does it meet needs for integrity and responsibility to continue inspiring people about the transformative potential of NVC without being able to provide more than individual support to groups in places with scarce material resources? If our intention is to hold everyone's needs with care, and if people with privilege in a system already have many needs attended to, how do we provide institutional support for those with less access to resources so their needs are acknowledged and addressed? What would bring about a truly collaborative structure? Addressing unequal access to resources and opportunities is often left to individual choice without a concerted effort to brainstorm collective solutions. The likelihood of a project receiving widespread support in this system depends on one's proximity to those with power and influence. This topic often gets put on hold when left to voluntary effort. We want to address issues of privilege, but in NVC culture the onus is on self-connected individuals making requests to initiate social change. We recognize how challenging it is to speak up and put forward requests from the marginalized and under-resourced position. There needs to be institutional support to address the gap between idealism and implementing concrete change. 5. A lack of clear infrastructure in how individuals and groups can access institutional support. 7. Makes it extremely difficult for folks to even get the attention of those in power who can bring the institutional support. We grappled with questions such as, who would an individual or small community go to in the new proposed structure to gain institutional/CNVC funding for a local project? If groups are self-organizing around weaves, how do we address the problems of flow of resources between the weaves so that those weaves with more resources, for example common money, NVC knowledge in the global north. Time, community, in the global south, can send resources to those areas where it's needed. We acknowledge that folks in the global north would want to support the folks in the global south but may lack awareness of what's needed or the structural support to do so. It's our hope that fostering ongoing dialogue about what structural support could look like will invite creativity and more collaboration on this topic. Note: we speak broadly about global north/south because it captures systemic variations in access, but also acknowledge other variations in access that occur within those subdivisions, for example, variations in resources between subgroups within those regions, between individuals in those regions. 6. Structural solutions. 1. Establishing weaves organized in an access cluster. Why? Given all the concerns identified in terms of access, we believe it is essential to have significant and ongoing attention to issues of access integrated fully into the function and structure of NVCO. The establishment of a cluster rather than just one weave is consistent with the amount of effort necessary to transcend the legacy of separation that permeates the world. Status: an initial set of functions and activities is included in the integrated plan as part of implementation tasks in the following document, Lumped BH8 creating access tasks. 2. Having a person on the Global Council whose role is dedicated to issues of access. Why? We recognize an almost insurmountable barrier exists for individuals/small groups on the margins to put forward requests for institutional support and to communicate their needs to people in the centers of power who may have gaps in understanding/framing of the problem. An access leader would already have understanding about these issues, and could liaise between communities/people on the margins and members of those weaves entrusted with making proposals or arriving at decisions, for example, helping connect folks from communities on the margins to the members of the fundraising weaves who are managing funds reserved for access purposes. 6. Status: fully integrated into the structure of NVC 0 in this plan. 083. Developing a curriculum on power, privilege, and social location for use in peer feedback in recognized roles community weaves, and in ongoing feedback regarding recognized roles. Why? The purpose of this curriculum is to raise the consciousness of new NVC practitioners and ambassadors about how they might be unknowingly reproducing hierarchical relationships in their teaching/practice of NVC. Discuss what true partnership looks like across power differences, compared to the charity model of handout or hand-up/down. Illuminate any assumptions embedded in the way they teach, raising awareness of the impact of their societal position in relation to others. Make this awareness tangible, observable, explainable. Identify the body of transforming oppression work, commonly referred to as anti-oppression work, that we would like to see included as part of the work folks will engage in as part of the certification and renewal of certification process. Incorporate consciousness around power and privilege into what is put forward as NVC practice. Status: specific strategies are being developed with the certification WG. 4. Having a designated access person in each community interface weave. Why? Given that unaware reproduction of existing relationships of power and privilege, or other barriers to access, is still embedded in human societies, ongoing attention to interrupt and transform such patterns and habits is needed in every part of NVC 0 in order to take root over time. Status: fully integrated in the operational agreements document, including the caveat about some groups opting not to have an access person under certain conditions. 7. CNVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan. Resources 69. Assumptions. Present situation. Assumptions are implicit. CNVC is a USA business entity whose purpose is to support the spread of NVC into the world. CNVC has an international scope. NVC is a known brand of a communication process known as nonviolent communication and, elsewhere, as compassionate communication. There is more to NVC than communication. NTs were created by Marshall Rosenberg and licensed to CNVC. Certification of NVC trainers is administered and overseen by CNVC. Proceeds of royalties of NVC materials written by Marshall go to Marshall's family. 2. Future assumptions. NVC 0 is a non-USA entity and or not singularly identified with the USA. A NVC sans borders entity. NVC 0 will be based on principles of self-management, awareness and evolutionary purpose, and reflect the energy, resource flows of a learning organization with resources flowing in many directions, often simultaneously and mutually influential. Resource flows provide essential information and feedback for growing capacity. NVC 0 is constituted by and serves the partners and, through them, the community and those who are interested in NVC, but who do not necessarily identify themselves as the community. The projects, offerings, and activities related to the vision, purpose, and mission of NVC0 are created and managed by partners or weaves who are actively engaged in realizing these. Some resources, including financial, will be stewarded as a commons. Present resources resources financial /NTs /book/educational materials store trainer fees C7-1 donations certification process intellectual property Rosenberg gift tree anti-restrictions other intellectual property or information mailing list website connection web who knows who. A subset of information and experience talent expertise passion technological experience of larger community principles self-management. Decisions are made by the individuals and groups taking action awareness. Individuals are welcome and encouraged to bring their full selves beyond job descriptions and business norms. Evolutionary purpose. NVC0 operates with an inspiring purpose that attracts people to join as partners. Surplus. The activities of NVC0 will regeneratively support the vision, purpose, and mission of the organization and the people working in service of it, attending ecologically to the well-being of all life. Accountability, matching risk and result. For example, initiators, weaves or partners of projects or other activities requiring resources of the commons are responsible for the success of the project, including raising whatever funds are needed and covering liabilities resulting from setbacks and/or unanticipated consequences. Learning, feedback related to resources contributes to learning definitions. Name of organization, for the purposes of resource generation, allocation, and management. The emerging international NVC organization is known as NVCO. Resources, meaning to rise again. Those elements and practices that contribute to the viability of NVC0. NVC0 financial resources self-sustaining weaves. This section pertains to weaves that generate their own financial resources as needed for their work. 1. Each weave will establish its own decision-making process for guiding how they deal with the financial aspects of its economic system, if financial elements exist, relative to generating, allocating, and managing resources, and providing for their own dissolution as they see fit in accordance with principles and agreements that exist within NVCO. 2. Funds generated by weaves through fundraising will have an X% go to Global South Fund in all cases. Also, Y% will go to the common pool when fundraising from contributors or foundations/governments takes advantage of the legal status of NVC0, for example, to allow tax-deductible contributions, maintenance and common function weaves. This section pertains to resources held in common and functions that sustain the entire NVCO. 1. Resource generation of the resources held in common. Anticipated revenue streams for the common pool of resources that can be used in the budget marketplace. NTS 2. Contributions from individuals within the NVCO community and beyond for general operating use. 3. Direct fundraising efforts geared toward individuals and foundations for general operating use. 4. % of funds generated through weaves/projects that raise funds requiring a non-profit status, X% above. B. Anticipated revenue streams that are restricted. I. Contributions from individuals or weaves that are designated for specific purposes. 2. Foundation grants for specific purposes or projects. 2. Resource allocation. Prior to the implementation phase, an estimated budget will be drafted for NVCO. The focus of this budget is on resources held in common rather than generated by weaves for their own functioning. The budget will include and is not limited to I. Initial considerations regarding what it will cost to maintain the infrastructure of NVCO and other functions currently offered by CNVC. 2. Projections from CNVC about NT surplus that is predicted for 2017. 3. Fundraising goals and methods. 4. A scope and budget for creating and hosting a virtual home to serve the organization. Note, the virtual home will be self-managing, open source for the partners to contribute to and use. Think Wikipedia. Funding for the virtual C7-372 home will come from those funds presently held by CNVC as trustee for the global NVC network, with any excess funds required to be found/raised and contributed by the NVC0 community. V. The scope and budget for creating and hosting a website, the purpose of which is for the organization to interface with the world. Note, a separate scope and budget for this website is only needed if substantially different from the virtual home. Funding for the virtual home will come from those funds presently held by CNVC as trustee for the global NVC network, with any excess funds required to be found/raised and contributed by the NVC0 community. 3. Budget Marketplace. The Budget Marketplace is established for all weaves that draw on unrestricted common pool resources. This includes functions currently run by NVC, additional maintenance and infrastructure functions that may be provided by some weaves, all non-self-sustaining project weaves, and any other weaves that want to use funds that are held in common. At the start of each quarter, any NVC 0 partner or weave can submit a formal proposal to direct resources from the common pool NVCO's funds to any weave during an online project and budget marketplace on the virtual home and potentially at corresponding in-person gatherings as well. 1. To support issues related to access to the marketplace. We predict that proposal, project and budget coaching will be available both through the virtual home and via a weave dedicated to offering such coaching support. 2. Prior to that 2-week period, we expect that partners and weaves will have already begun the process of actively soliciting input, advice, feedback, etc. from people either knowledgeable about or impacted by the projects. 1. To support awareness of issues of access when allocating resources, each partner or weave submitting a budget proposal is asked to solicit feedback/advice from the weave within the access cluster to become aware of the potential effects of their proposal on underserved individuals and groups. 3. During the 2-week period of the project and budget marketplace, partners are asked to view list of projects and their allocations/budget proposals in order to be mutually influenced and give each other feedback. 4. We anticipate the partners and weaves will have also passively, without active solicitation, welcomed input from the entire NVC community, in accordance with the modified advice process. C7-4V. At the end of the 2-week period, weaves will finalize their proposal and budgets in light of all input. 6. As described in the advice process as modified within the NVCO, any partner may request that a particular proposal be subject to a collective decision-making process. 7. At the end of the 2-week period, assuming there are sufficient funds and no call for a collective process, all final proposals are fully funded from the common pool. 8. If there are not sufficient funds, the project and budget marketplace and accompanying advice process is extended by a week to allow for further proposal input and amendments. If an adequate resolution is still not found, the marketplace can again be extended, and/or a restorative process can be initiated. 9. If someone experiences a proposal or a resource allocation as in direct conflict with the vision/mission/purpose of NVCO, they may initiate a process as described within the NVCO conflict transformation system to address the concerns. B. Examples of potential proposals. Revolving loan fund. Create a revolving loan fund to offer access to financial resources for project implementation. The fund shall be regenerative, including a fee for management and attention to changes to cost of living. 2. Seed money for a project that is not returned ever, for example in the Global South. 3. Website upgrade. 4. Marketing consultants NVCO flow of non-financial resources. The Implementation Council is asked to design a process for establishing a marketplace for offering, requesting, giving and receiving non-financial resources such as materials, human support, etc. This can be done ongoingly on the virtual home and periodically in a live marketplace similar to the one established for the financial resources. Alignment with values. The Implementation Council is asked to look into the specific values and principles that exist in other parts of the plan to see how they affect resource generation, allocation, and management. Where any concerns arise for the Implementation Council, it is authorized to amend the plan to align with the rest of the integrated plan or to take any other action it sees fit to create alignment. C7-5, 74 CNVC New Future Process. Integrated Plan Community Preamble. When the community working group began to talk about this elusive term, community, what it meant for those of us passionate about NVC, and what a global organization might do to support more of it, one thing was quickly apparent: we'd all felt that special sense of NVC community, loved it, and wished for more, both for ourselves and the world. And as we spoke to people around the globe, we got the same message. There were many celebrations for that special experience of being in a group of people, where we feel accepted, heard and feel a shared sense of purpose and approach. One participant in our live forum compared being in community with other NVC enthusiasts to being around a warm campfire. There were longings for more time around the campfire. Mornings for the places where those campfires didn't exist, or where it had burnt out, through conflict, or loss of leaders/energy. Our approach. One of our group members, Joe Kimsvan, told a story about his father, a business leader and consultant. Hi's father had told him that rather than plan out where the paths might go in a community space, community planners could design spaces so that the paths were made by the people themselves. For Joachim's father, it was a metaphor for self-organization. The paths were made by walking. We wanted to use this spirit of inclusion and organic growth in our approach. We wanted to build community as we talked about community. Include more voices than those in the working group. We wanted to live the spirit of inclusion and openness in our work. Not just to come up with concepts and ideas on paper, but to actually test out ideas, see how they worked, and put them into play. We wanted to experiment with our ideas as we developed them. Bring a spirit of play and aliveness, and of creating a joyful global get-together, to both our work and to the new future process. Our main strategies to these ends were 75 meetings and discussions within our group. Over the course of 3 months, a live forum series of open calls around community, an online forum for discussion, connection, and information sharing, several informal one-on-one interviews. We also enjoyed spin-offs from these activities, where some of the people we encountered volunteered their time, energy, knowledge and ideas. We were delighted to receive this support, and to enjoy community in our work on community even outside of our working group. Qualities and experiences of community. Imagine this: we have easy, frequent and free ways to connect to each other, whether virtual or face-to-face. Community exists as a beautiful backdrop to be enjoyed at will, without effort, without rush. A full circle, around the world, holding hands, eye contact, smiles, and spaciousness. While we connect with others, which we do out of pure joy, it is easy, natural even, to stay connected with a sense of self, hear our own thoughts, feel our own feelings as well as those of others. We can find solitude as easily as communion. We rest in a shared understanding of our common purpose, like when working together on an organic farm or putting Thanksgiving tables out on the street offering food and company to everyone. We let each other bloom. Stormy times sometimes come to community. No wrongness about stormy times, we all have them. We have conflict, we disagree, we get angry, frustrated, tired, confused. Even in those times, we trust in each other's humanity and goodwill. We are in companionship with each other. We may take moments to resource. And we come back towards each other, reconnecting heart to heart beyond our judgments. So what makes NVC community special? What are the kinds of experiences we most want to grow within our network, and offer to the rest of the world? Sense of safety/warmth/acceptance, a sense of being valued and welcome. Sense of belonging, that we are at home in a group, and are valued, no matter our diverse backgrounds. Sense of inclusion, an intention to include, and that each individual contribution adds to the whole. Deep connection, sharing with others our deeper experiences of life, joys and sorrows, grief, and celebrations. Shared purpose/values, individuals in our community share a sense of purpose in integrating and living NVC. And we share an understanding of principles and values that we put into practice with each other, in a mutual quest for the field beyond right and wrong thinking. Curiosity/seeking connection, seeking to connect beyond conflict, walking towards life, discovering more about diversity and what is unknown about the other, cultivating curiosity in one's life and social environment/communities. Equality and mattering/sharing of power, includes owning/transparency of privileges/power and transforming abuse/oppression on a personal, interrelational, cultural and structural level. Shared leadership. Transparency and repair possibility. Self-responsibility, also authentic boundaries, self-care/care of others. Attending to the needs of the group/whole, which may at times mean we let go of attachment to our own expression, or attending to certain needs through this particular community. And outlining these experiences/values of community, we also wish to especially recognize the importance of access and inclusion. The Creating Access Working Group proposal made several recommendations, most in the form of future strategies for enhancing this proposal. These are listed in the appendix. Actionable decisions. We acknowledge the uncertainty of what the eventual shape of NVC 0 might be, and what resources and structure it will have to support these decisions. With the aim of self-organization in mind, we would like our decisions to be understood for a transitional phase, to steward the change process from having a central organization to fully support self-management on every level. Therefore, our general approach is to create openness and possibilities for connection and support whatever arises from the community. We intend for these decisions to support both 2D, virtual, and 3D, in-person, community connections. We see an interplay between the two. For example, Someone may be able to find an in-person community near them by first connecting online. We are relying on the distinction between members and partners. A member, someone who joins our community and participates in any way that makes sense to them. 3. A partner. Someone who, in addition to joining a larger community, is also committed to supporting the organization's vision, purpose, and mission and participates in decision-making. Our intention is for our actionable decisions to support members primarily. We see and want to encourage partners and partner organizational weaves emerging from member communities. Our 4 decisions are: 1. Build a virtual home. 2. Create a living guidebook for NVC communities. 3. Keep the NVC Empowerment Forum (NEF) line open. 4. Formally recognize and support a group of community weavers. Note: the Global Council, when formed, will monitor the activity of community weavers and will invite the formation of a community weavers weave if it determines that this will support the organization. How will these decisions be fueled? We see each of these decisions, with the exception of number 1, primarily fueled/resourced by passion/personal motivation versus monetary resources. The virtual home would require external resources to create and maintain the infrastructure. The guidebook and NEF would need minimal financial resources, for example, maintaining a video conferencing account. The community weavers would be embedded in weaves. The discussion of how these weaves would access/create resources is detailed in other proposals. 1. Virtual home, a space for community to happen. Decision: build a virtual home for the purposes of connection and information sharing, with the overall intention to create space and capacity for community to build community. This space is offered with the invitation to contribute in it, to own it even. Goal: to enable information flow between individuals and groups that are both members or partners in the netweb, as defined by the Structure and Governance Working Group, anyone who wants to learn and live NVC and wants to participate. Background: we recognize that other working groups, starting with the Structure and Governance Working Group, have also called for a virtual home. We want to support this while also bringing some of the special flavors of community, particularly around the concept of self-organization and paths made by walking. The virtual home is a place that connects, not necessarily the place where everything happens. There are already hundreds of Facebook groups or email lists on specific topics or for certain regions out there. We encourage the group working on the virtual home to research what is out there and include it and build on it rather than replace it. The virtual home invites individual initiatives, for example the 4 joint calendar of new future working group calls, and organically creates space for these kinds of 78 community activities. The virtual home invites these groups to be present by offering space for them to introduce themselves. It provides easy accessibility and search functionality for topics or regions. To that, it is a database including people, communities, themes, material, and offers different paths to finding what you are looking for. In addition, the virtual home is also a place for online direct connections by offering rooms. We recognize that not everyone will have access to virtual portals or community. We hope that this is something that the community weavers decision for, particularly those associated with community interface weaves, will address. Key implementation activities: form a group that designs the virtual home and collaborates with its specialists who implement it. In their proposal, the Structure and Governance Working Group calls such a group the Home Weavers. Since this is a key decision of several different working groups, prioritize strategies for funding the virtual home. Recommendations: while forming the group that designs the virtual home, we recommend the Implementation Council to follow the Create and Access Working Group's suggestions on how to actively invite people who are not from North America or Europe, connect to people who have done training in different countries, ask for contacts, get in touch with them personally on phone/Skype if they can, and build relationships. Within North America and Europe we can ask communities, who is on the margin of your community? Who is left and why? We suggest to develop the virtual home in small, usable steps. Design ideas, expand and integrate a searching/connecting opportunity from a master database of all members and partners, organizations, communities, live or virtual, groups, local or virtual, etc. And offering zooming in/search opportunities by region, focus, channels, etc. This includes capacity for all these various groups to post their existence, contact info and latest updates. We aim for an easy-to-use possibility for people to enter their own and their group's data and to actively search for and invite NVC-related groups, be it Facebook groups, forums, or groups using any other social media platforms/channels. Keep an open meeting line for community events to happen, and a way for participants to schedule and communicate times/themes, for example daily rememberings, spontaneous 5 meetings, fixed open meetings, an open online course on how to form your practice group. See Decision 3. Maintain a support line as a telephone number with office hours, or provide some other way to contact people who know their way around the organization and the virtual home. Global Event Calendar, a shareable calendar with capacity to read and post all NVC-related events worldwide. iCal, Google Cal, Yahoo Cal, etc. A place for individuals, organizations, communities, initiatives to post requests, and offers a searchable database of free material, for example palatable mini-resources, links to resources in the web, information on what works for community building. See Decision 2. NVC Couchsurfing, a database of communities and contact persons. Live world map of NVC activities newsletter encouraging people to share what is going on in their communities in short messages, links to and updates from NVC-related groups, for example Facebook groups, forums, social media platforms, and any other community-based projects/channels. 2. A living guidebook for NVC communities. Decision. Create and offer a living repository of suggestions, stories, tools, and practices for NVC communities, groups, and weaves, as part of the virtual home. Goal. Support to communities in being sustainable and thriving. This is offered with a humble intention of, this worked for us. See if it might be of support for you. This is also a place to collect such stories, lessons learned, insights, inquiries, etc. Background. While this guidebook is intended to be part of the virtual home, we feel it is important enough to make it a distinct and high-priority decision. This includes a relatively short document on insights, what works, as well as the possibility to add new techniques and discuss or ask questions for known principles in a specified area of the virtual home. This would also be a space to share ideas outside of NVC, for example, ZEG Forum, deep democracy that could support community. The guidebook would support communities with connection as the prime objective, and also those that are driven to other purposes/projects, such as contributing to a specific population, projects, etc. 6 key implementation activities. Form a group to do the following: create a short document on guidelines to building NVC communities. Circulate freely and update. Create possibility for people to add to this by sharing what works for them as a part of the virtual home. Recommendations. The following 5 areas could be the basis for the living guidebook. We have developed an outline based on this. A. Community building. I. Sharing values, interests, passions to build resonance, warmth, energy. B. Community building. 2. Supporting belonging and equal mattering. C. Community building. 3. Building trust, safety through agreements. D. Community living/thriving. E. Community repair through/after conflict or harm. 3. NVC Empowerment for online decision. Keep the NVC Empowerment Forum (NEF) line open. This means that NVC 0 maintains, funds and technically supports the current Fuse line, or an alternative solution. Goal: to serve the need for live community and connection. Background: the calls are a live experience of NVC community that can be a powerful way to bring people together, as we saw with the celebrating and mourning that happened around Marshall's passing. After witnessing the growing use of the Fuse/Zoom CNVC account for transparent meetings, and our community working groups, community on community calls series, we believe that the NVC Empowerment Forum open line meets a need for community in new and hopeful ways. We think it would be a key way that community could continue to gather online while still keeping some of the campfire warmth. As with the living guidebook, this is intended to be part of the virtual home, and important enough for us to make it a distinct and high priority decision. Furthermore, the NEF line is not dependent on the virtual home being created. At the time of writing there is already a group working on reawakening the NEF line. 7 key implementation activities. Establish clear responsibilities for maintaining, funding and technically supporting the NEF line. Take care to ensure that this does not fall between the chairs if or when the International Center is replaced by a virtual home. Give formal recognition of and support to people, groups and strategies that encourage people to use the line in self-organizing ways, for example, creating and scheduling their own events/series on the line. Recommendations. Investigate other technology that might serve the purpose of the calls and the need for an open line, for example, Zoom. Build on the ways open calls are being used to keep people informed and participating in the new future process. In particular, consider hosting an annual series of calls like the Community Working Group Live Forum calls, with the same or similar topics for the community weavers. Decision: support an international group of community weavers to steward the community. Goal: to bring aliveness and warmth to NVC communities, both face-to-face and in the virtual home. Background: we believe that just like a party, much depends on the hosts. Without that special sense of invitation, fun, and care, the party will feel dead. The community weavers are all partners who choose to take on this work. They would be part of community interface weaves, or may form their own distinct weaves in other clusters as relevant to their specific purpose. The community weaver's specific purpose would be to steward the qualities and experiences of community listed above within the NVC community. Some of the community working group intends to start the work of weavers as described above and continue to experiment, even as the Integration Council considers NVC 0 next steps. Key implementation activities: give formal recognition to the community weavers, to support their work in the transition phase, when such recognition still matters. Connect with the community weavers to exchange information and consider meeting the need for support as it may rise during the transition phase. The community weavers would be partners with a specific focus on community within each community interface weave. 8 recommendations. Community weavers would work closely with the Home Weavers Group, proposed by the Structure and Governance Working Group. While the Home Weavers would ensure the smooth running of the virtual home, the community weavers would be the hosts. Community weavers would have fluency with the technology, and easy ways to get support from the home weavers. Community weavers will take on specific tasks, such as inviting. At the beginning of the transition to any new structure, we see community weavers having a very important role as ambassadors, actively inviting people to connect with the broader local community and or migrate to the virtual home and to join or connect with a weaver group. To reach out personally to places where people have less resources/access, working with others in the network to ensure access, greeting new participants within the virtual home and or community interface weaves, helping others to join and participate, facilitating regular open calls for those new to NVC, self-organization or the virtual home hosting and initiating conversations, through forums or calls, and continue to animate them storytelling, letting others know about what is happening within the virtual home and the wider NVC community. Playfully creating a sense of you don't want to miss out. For example, through an online magazine, and inviting/collecting news stories guiding, creation of the Living Guidebook. Decision number 2. Supporting those who want to get involved more actively. Modeling of how to step into self-organization. These may become separate subgroups within weaves of community weavers. The community weavers themselves model the kind of community they are encouraging. The work of the community working group is a seed for a community weavers weave to grow from 9 appendix. Access Working Group Auditions 83 Bullet. We endorse the Community WG's proposal to create a toolkit or a resource kit for individuals and communities when they are first introduced to NVC so that they can continue to explore and build relevance for NVC in their community. Bullet. Reach out to individuals who are currently or interested in working with people in the margins, contexts where there are people who don't have as much access to economic resources, working without much support, especially people who are reaching out to share NVC with those who are not represented in the majority of the NVC community, people working in the global south and or people in the margins in terms of race/gender/class/caste. Bullet. Create a regular, ongoing teleclass where folks can call to get support for challenges related to rank and privilege they are witnessing or experiencing in their NVC community. May include empathy for those who've quit and for ourselves as leaders, our own blinders and losses. Bullet. Create a handout or highlight on the NVC 0 website a link for people to request support with educating others around issues of access, such as an access hotline akin to a How's My Driving number. Bullet. Facilitate partnerships between sister communities where one community makes a specific commitment with accountability to an emerging community or community with fewer material resources who is needing support. Bullet. Get feedback from folks who have left NVC community or create a feedback form that supports trainers to understand cultural environment issues. The completed form to be collected by the Access Weave instead of the individual trainer in case there's a lack of trust of trainer. Feedback accessible to other trainers for learning purposes. Aspirational. Bullet. Generate ideas of which groups we see as not being represented, who's not in the room in present giraffe circles.